the chair of this committee, and would you like to introduce yourself, Mr. Appleby?
Steve Appleby, Director of Educator Support and Higher Education at the New Hampshire Department of Education.
Oliver Ford, Education Committee State Representative.
Thank you very much. So I think the first order of business is the minutes from the last meeting that we had in June. Have you read the minutes? Do you have any problems, omissions, deletions? If not, I'm looking for a motion to accept the minutes.
Move to accept the meeting.
Second? Thank you very much. The minutes are accepted. Now, we have the pleasure to have Liz Moultrup here, and she's gonna talk about the relationship between teacher perceived, administrative leadership style, and so that should be good, because a lot of the young teachers I've spoken with say that they feel lack of support. So,
That's interesting. Well, look at what the data says. This is a power button, I'm assuming?
Yeah, that turns on the microphone.
here we go.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Moultrup, and as Senator Ward said, today I'm here to present the findings from my dissertation study titled Exploring the Relationship Between Teacher-Perceived Administrator Leadership Style and Teacher Morale. I'm currently a doctoral candidate at New England College. I'm in my 16th year of teaching in public schools, and I currently serve the district of Hillsborough-Deering as a 6th grade English teacher. First, thank you for the opportunity to share my research with the hope of making some sort of positive impact on teacher retention. Before I go into details regarding my study, I always feel it's important that my audience knows my why. So why, on a personal and professional level, did I choose to explore teacher morale and its relationship to teacher-perceived administrator leadership style? Now, my husband would tell you it's because every school year, right around April, I become so frustrated with the way decisions are made for the next school year that I declare I'm quitting, I'm going to open a bakery, I'm going to eat cake all day. And then he reminds me that means I would have to work in the summer, and I hate baking. So I love my job, don't get me wrong, but that feeling is real. Although I'm blessed to work with a wonderful principal, the need to feel more satisfied with school leadership is real. And my colleagues and my classmates at NEC would tell you I decided to research this topic because of the roles I filled at my school, which Representative Ford and I were just talking about. I am the building representative for the local chapter of our union, and I am also the lead mentor in my building for newly hired teachers. These two positions lead to a lot of one-on-one conversations with my colleagues regarding issues of concern, many of which have to do with administration. I come to you today, however, as a researcher, and when I started to consider my dissertation topic, I felt the need to explore the teacher-administrator relationship to hopefully find ways in which administrators can help teachers feel more satisfied with their job and increase teacher retention rates, which not only benefits teachers, but administrators and students as well. So thankfully, I think I have some findings to show you today that led to achieving that overall goal. So I really wanted to understand the teacher's perspective of the administrator's leadership style and how those perspectives relate to their morale. So this was really an exploration of the teacher-administrator relationship as seen from the teacher. So why does all of this matter? I know much of this is not going to be news to the committee, but when reviewing the past and current literature surrounding these topics, I discovered not only does this research matter to the adults involved, it matters greatly to students. First, many researchers note teachers who experience high levels of morale are more committed to their job, and they tend to increase work productivity. High teacher morale also positively impacts students' academic achievement, learning, performance, and emotional success. Regarding teacher attrition, which is caused by many factors, when teachers leave their positions, their students are directly impacted because their learning is interrupted, but all students are indirectly impacted because the school's operating system regresses. And furthermore, those who are students of color and or are from low-income households tend to be the most negatively when teachers leave their positions. And unfortunately, disadvantaged communities seem to be the ones who bear the brunt of the teacher shortage. So in my research, I sought to discover what principals can do to increase teacher morale and job satisfaction, since those two concepts are closely linked, and hopefully increase teacher retention rates. I used a multiple methods approach, so I collected quantitative and qualitative data with a survey, meaning there were closed-ended and open-ended questions. The closed-ended questions included the teacher satisfaction scale, which measured teacher job satisfaction, and the empowerment and accountability subsections of the servant leadership survey, which measured teachers' perspective of the ways in which their school principals empowered them and held them accountable. The two open-ended questions at the end asked teachers to identify up to 3 ways in which their principal contributed to their job satisfaction, and up to 3 ways in which their principal detracted from their job satisfaction. So in January of 2023, I sent an invitation email for my study to all public school superintendents and principals in the state of New Hampshire, who then had the choice to send it on to their teachers. I ended up with 263 participants who completed the closed-ended questions, and 197 participants who completed the open-ended questions. So the numbers dwindled a bit by the end of the survey, but that's to be expected. These participants included general education teachers, special educators, and unified arts teachers of all experience levels in all content areas in grades pre-kindergarten through 12. The survey closed in mid-February, which is when I entered the analysis phase of the research. I analyzed responses to the closed-ended questions and wrote descriptive statistics for the total population as well as demographic groups. I calculated Spearman correlations to determine the correlation between certain variables. I calculated chi-squared tests of independence to analyze the predictability of certain responses, and I coded the open-ended responses into 4 major themes. So first, let's look at some of the average composite scores and frequency of responses on each section of the survey. The average composite score for all participants on the teacher satisfaction scale was 3.78 out of 5. Also, 82.2% of all participants agreed teaching was close to their ideal. 78.3% agreed they were satisfied with being a teacher, and 77.3% agreed they were getting what they wanted out of teaching. So overall, it appears as though the teacher participants were pretty happy and satisfied with their job. There were also some demographic groups that appeared to be highly satisfied with teaching and their working conditions. First, 85.7% of teachers with 1 to 2 years of experience agreed they were satisfied with teaching. And overall, they had the highest percentages of agreement on all 5 items on the teacher satisfaction scale when compared to participants with more experience. Also, 87.5% of teachers who worked with their principal for over 10 years agreed they felt satisfied with teaching, which was the highest percentage of agreement when compared to those who worked with their principal for fewer years. And lastly, 80.2% of teachers who worked with their principal for over 10 years felt their working conditions were excellent. These last 2 data points may provide implications for further research or a literature review regarding the relationship between principal retention and teacher job satisfaction. Here are a few more interesting pieces from the satisfaction part of the survey that were not quite as uplifting. First, only 60% of teachers who identified as non-white agreed they were satisfied with teaching. Second, only 66.7% of teachers with 3 to 5 years of experience felt satisfied with teaching. And lastly, 72.7% of teachers of multiple grades, so those that required teaching of grade levels not traditionally found within one school, agreed they were satisfied with teaching. So we need to question why these demographic groups, particularly those who identified as non-white, felt this way. The frequency of responses on the item regarding working conditions stood out as well. First, only 63.5% of all participants agreed their working conditions were excellent. Also, only 51.5% of teachers with 3 to 5 years of experience felt their working conditions were excellent, while all other while 64.3% of those who identified as white felt the same. While percentages of agreement to the item regarding working conditions being excellent were low to begin with, there is some cause for concern for these two demographic groups. The next section of the survey was the Servant Leadership Survey Accountability subsection, which measured the level at which participants felt their principal held them and their colleagues accountable. On this part of the survey, the average composite score was 4.23 out of 5, showing that many participants felt their principal held them and their colleagues accountable. 85.8% agreed their principal held them accountable for the work they did. 80.6% agreed their principal held them accountable for their performance, and 80.4% agreed their principal held them and their colleagues responsible for the way they handled their job. So overall, it appears as if accountability is not a major issue regarding the way in which participants viewed their principal's leadership style, but there were some pieces in the qualitative data, which I'll share later, that refuted these statistics. For the last part of the survey, the average composite score on the Servant Leadership Survey Empowerment subsection was 3.99 out of 5. This shows that many teachers felt empowered by their school principal. 77.9% of participants agreed their principal encouraged them to come up with new ideas. 82.1% agreed their principal gave them the authority to make decisions. And 84.6% agreed their principal enabled them to solve problems on their own. It seems as if teachers viewed their principal as giving them autonomy and encouraging their creativity, both of which can be empowering. However, on the same subsection of the survey, only 65.7% of participants agreed their principal helps them further develop themselves, and 64.9% agreed their principal offered them abundant opportunities to learn new skills. In addition, 72.2% agreed their principal gave them the information they needed to do their job well. So even though many teachers appear to feel trusted and empowered when it comes to their creativity, it seems as if many did not feel they were given ample opportunities to develop their skills and hone their craft. So I was very curious about this, and I decided to dig deeper into the professional development items on the survey to see if I could find any pattern or groups of teachers who were feeling the least empowered when it came to professional development. So on this slide, you'll notice two percentages for each type of teacher who took part in the study: general education teachers, special educators, and unified arts teachers. The numbers represent the percentage of participants within that demographic who agreed their principal helps them further develop themselves, that's the first percentage, and their principal offered abundant opportunities to learn new skills, that's the second percentage. Please note the type of teacher with the lowest percentage of agreement on both items was general education teachers. Next, I looked at grade level taught, and you'll notice the group with the lowest percentage of agreement on these same two items regarding professional development was those who taught grades 9 through 12. Then I examined years of teaching experience, finding those with 6 to 10 and over 10 years of experience had the lowest percentage of agreement on the same two items. And lastly, I analyzed the number of years worked with the principal and discovered those with 6 to 10 years worked with the principal had the lowest percentage of agreement on the items regarding professional development opportunities. I also found an interesting pattern when it came to the perception of empowerment, one in which helps to give us a target group of teachers on which to focus retention efforts. For every question on the empowerment subsection of the survey, there were 7 in all, participants who taught grades pre-K to 5 had the highest percentages of agreement. Then, for each item, those who taught grades 6 to 8 had lower percentages of agreement, and those who taught grades 9 to 12 had the lowest percentages of agreement. This happened for every single item on the empowerment subsection of the survey. What you see here is just one example of this. The data suggests that those who taught grades pre-K to 5 felt the most empowered, those who taught grades 6 to 8 felt less empowered than they did, and those who taught grades 9 to 12 felt the least empowered overall. Now, I agree all teachers, regardless of position, grade level, years of experience, and so on, deserve any quality and meaningful professional development. appears that there is a subgroup within the bigger set of participants that may benefit the most from enhanced professional development opportunities. According to the demographic breakdown, that group of teachers is general educators who work in grades 9 through 12 and have over 3 years of experience and or have worked with their principal between 6 and 10 years. I included those with 3 to 5 years of experience in this target group because, as previously noted, only 66.7% of those teachers agreed they felt satisfied with teaching. It will also be necessary to focus on teachers who identify as non-white, considering they had low job satisfaction scores as well. Furthermore, it should be noted there is another group of teachers who overall seem to feel the most positive about teaching. Participants who had worked with their principal for over 10 years seem to feel the most empowered and the most satisfied with their job when compared to all other demographic groups. In fact, 0 of these participants strongly disagreed on 6 of the 7 items on the empowerment survey, and only 2 of these participants strongly disagreed on any item on the job satisfaction scale. So again, in this way, the data suggests there may be a need to look further into the relationship between principal retention and teacher sense of empowerment and job satisfaction. So now let's talk a little bit about the Spearman correlations, which measured the relationship between 2 variables. I was genuinely surprised to find 2 relationships with no correlation. There was no correlation between years of teaching experience and job satisfaction, as well as no correlation between years worked with a principal and job satisfaction. This may indicate that it does not matter how many years of experience a teacher has, or how many principals with whom they've worked. Their job satisfaction may not be impacted by these factors. I see this as a positive piece of the puzzle because this may indicate that teachers can feel satisfied with their job at any experience level, even when principal retention is an issue, and therefore administrators can help increase job satisfaction for teachers who are at any point in their career. The data also revealed a moderate positive correlation between composite scores on the empowerment subsection of the survey and composite scores on the satisfaction section. That is the first scatter plot diagram you see. This may indicate that as job satisfaction increased for participants, so did their sense of empowerment. I would argue that since professional development is part of the way in which teachers feel empowered, and since sense of empowerment and job satisfaction had a moderate positive correlation, perhaps enhancement of professional development for teachers could increase job satisfaction. Also, there was a moderate positive correlation between scores on the empowerment and accountability subsections, which may show that as participants' sense of empowerment increased, so did their sense of accountability. Perhaps this means that to keep teachers' sense of empowerment high, administrators must also improve or maintain teachers' sense of accountability. To me, this means administrators are doing something well, considering the average composite scores on the accountability subsection of the survey were so high. It was so high. So let's talk about the qualitative data. When it came to coding and theming the open-ended response questions, it was clear participants wrote about 4 major topics when it came to the ways in which their principal contributed to and detracted from their job satisfaction. To better understand these 4 themes, I further broke down responses by levels on a continuum, from the most positive types of responses to the most negative. I categorized quotations and responses and placed them in appropriate categories on each continuum. First, the participants discussed trust, with descriptions of the ways in which they believed their principal to be empowering, so we're going kind of back to the quantitative piece as well, fair, trusting, relaxed, but relaxed in the sense of being too relaxed, authoritarian, and dishonest. Under the scope of support, participants wrote about the ways in which they felt their principal was loyal, empathetic, supportive, approachable, uninvolved, hindering, and adversarial. For communication, they described ways in which their principal was attentive, collaborative, clear and consistent, ambiguous, closed-minded, alienating, and disconnected. And lastly, under the umbrella of respect, they discussed their beliefs supported the findings from the quantitative analysis. So, for example, 34 participants, which accounted for 17% of those who completed the open-ended questions, wrote about their belief that their principal did not provide enriching professional development or opportunities for growth. These comments also accounted for 15% of all comments participants wrote regarding the theme of support. On the flip side, only 2 participants mentioned enriching professional development opportunities as a way in which their principals contributed to their job satisfaction, accounting for just 1% of responses. In this way, the qualitative analysis supports the implementation of some sort of program in which principals provide more meaningful professional development for their teachers. Another interesting piece to the qualitative analysis considers the participants who wrote the opposite of what was asked of them in the open-ended questions. For example, when asked to identify up to 3 ways in which their principal detracted from their job satisfaction, 34 participants wrote none, NA, or something similar, which accounted for 17% of total responses. Also, 13 participants chose to write detailed positive comments instead, such as, quote, "I just left a district where I was employed for 16 years. I left because I'm an inexperienced, ineffective new principal in a district full of incompetent administrators. My current principal is amazing because he holds students and staff accountable and cares about a positive work environment," end quote. Another participant described their principal as a, quote, "rock star." So 7% of participants wrote something positive when they had the chance to write something negative. I believe this shows that while some teachers are unhappy with their principal's leadership style and may not feel satisfied or empowered, many administrators are in fact doing something right. So, as already noted, I see a few ways to go from here. First, I strongly believe we must figure out what to do regarding the professional learning issue, particularly for that target group. What can we do to improve professional development for teachers so they feel more empowered? If the Spearman correlation displays that satisfaction and sense of empowerment have a moderate positive correlation, we may be able to help teachers feel more satisfied with their job if we find ways to provide high-quality professional development. Also, without a doubt, we must consider what we can do to help teachers who identify as non-white and those with 3 to 5 years of experience feel more satisfied with their job. We also must question what we can do to improve working conditions for these same 2 demographic groups. I do have some ideas I'm happy to share with the committee on what we can do to help these subgroups, particularly those with 3 to 5 years of experience. Furthermore, I believe more research is needed to understand the relationship between principal retention and teacher job satisfaction and empowerment, since participants who had worked with their principal for over 10 years seem to feel best about these issues. Lastly, and clearly, administrators must consider the ways in which communication, trust, support, and respect positively and negatively impact teachers and their overall job satisfaction, since these were the primary themes in the coding of the open-ended questions. That's all I have for you. I'm happy to take questions if needed.
No shot at all at the same time.
I just want to say thank you for coming and presenting this. We had met recently about this data, and I thought it would be important for the community to hear, because I think it shows a much more nuanced picture in some cases. And it highlights, I think, some things that we already kind of knew. For example, professional development. There are a lot of educators who feel that the professional development they receive is less than helpful or not as good as it could be, and maybe that's an area to look at. I also found it interesting the correlation between the length that someone had worked with their principal. I know in the school in my town, they just put out a list in our town newsletter of how long individual teachers had been at the school, and this is a school of about 500 K students, and there were, I think, more than 20 educators in the building who'd been there at least 20 years. And I think that speaks to, again, the long-term principle was well thought of. And so it's an interesting piece that we don't always
okay, no problem, I understand.
We were dealing with school funding issues.
Oh, it's terrible, nobody knows more.
I've got a couple questions. Thank you for your work. Do we know what the average tenure of a school principal is? Did you find anything like that?
I am not sure, at least not, I'm not sure even just in the state of New Hampshire. That's not something that I've looked at, just because the participants are from the state of New Hampshire. But that is a decent question to ask. This is just an assumption based on the research I've done. My guess is that the tenure is pretty low at this point. Principal retention is actually, it's more of a revolving door than teacher retention right now. So I'm not entirely sure of the numbers though.
Follow-up question on that. Thank you. Dealing with satisfaction of tenured teachers being 10 years or more, vis-a-vis that of new teachers. And did your study look at the differentiation between new teachers, let's say first 3-year teachers, vis-a-vis that of more experienced teachers? Because one of the concerns based upon what Steve was saying earlier is we may have some real satisfied tenured teachers, wrong term, experienced teachers vis-a-vis new teachers. And so I've got a concern about those new teachers who may not be satisfied, because we've heard data about the first 5 years you've got a 50% turnover of teachers vis-a-vis those who are experienced teachers and those who may be ready to retire versus those who are ready to leave because they're new. Did you find anything like that in the
Yes, so what my data showed, and I'm going back to the teacher satisfaction scale, which measured their job satisfaction. So teachers with over 10 years of experience, their average composite score was 4.05 out of 5. That's high. And then looking at teachers with 1 to 2 years of experience, their average composite score was 3.74, still relatively high. That number was the same for teachers with 3 to 5 years. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong data. Back up, hold on. I was looking at years worked with the principal. I'm sorry, let me start over. The numbers are going to be kind of similar though. So those who had worked over 10 years of experience had 3.76 as their average composite score, still high. Those who worked for 1 to 2 years, had 1 to 2 years of experience, their average composite score was higher at 3.84. Then, the group with the lowest average composite score was those who had taught for 3 to 5 years at 3.58, and those who had taught for 6 to 10 years had 3.71. So the 3 to 5 year bracket and the 6 to 10 year bracket, their average composite score was actually lower than those with 1 or 2 years of experience.
If I may, that doesn't surprise me, because I think what I have discovered that when a teacher enters their 6-8 years, they begin to say, okay, am I gonna do this for the rest of my life? Or am I gonna, and it's a critical professional decision, because if they make the decision that they're gonna stay, then they're gonna stay. But if they're still questioning it around that 6th or 7th year, that's when they have to make a decision whether or not they're gonna go someplace else and do some other kind of work other than just teaching. So it kind of verifies my unstatistical belief.
Yes, and anecdotally, just speaking from 16 years of teaching experience, teachers who have 1 or 2 years of experience are still sort of in the rainbows and unicorns phase of their career, right? They got into teaching and they love it because they're finally doing what they've always wanted to do. And a lot of people who are in that 3 to 10-ish year bracket they're questioning what their career is going to be for the rest of their life. But for many people, not all, for many, it's when they start having families. It's when there are other things going on in their lives that take a priority. So I definitely see that pattern just with my colleagues and teachers who I talk to all over the place. And something you said about the 10-year clicked in me. I don't remember the resource, but there's a researcher who says, and this is for all fields, that once you have put in 10 years or 10,000 hours of something is when you have finally mastered a skill. So I wonder, and this is just me thinking out loud, I wonder if after that 10 years people feel like, I have this now, I understand, I Doesn't mean we can say you no longer need professional development. But I just wonder, I'm just thinking out loud, I wonder if that's a factor as well, I'm not sure.
Go ahead.
Thank you. My question has to do with whether or not you were able to ascertain through this particular process, and I recognize that wasn't necessarily your thrust, so accept that up front. Whether or not there was a difference or a discernible difference in schools that provided opportunities for people to explore various roles in the school, assistant principal, program director, things like that, to assess a possible ability, skill, interest, no interest, and an administrative role, both in addition to teaching or instead of teaching or whatever. But I mean, just the fact that the school or the principal created or invited the teachers to consider opportunities to explore other options, whether that factored at all in.
So the quantitative piece of the study did not ask any questions regarding that. However, in the qualitative piece where people just responded to that question of how does your principal contribute to your job satisfaction, I can't tell you the number of participants off the top of my head, but several did mention, my principal empowers me professionally. They are in support of me going for a certificate of advanced study. They are in support of me trying a different role. I wanted to change my job position and they supported me in this. So it came up in the qualitative piece. I'm not sure how many participants actually mentioned that, a handful out of the 197, but it came up that way. I can't say that I accurately measured that, but it did come up in those responses.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Further questions?
Thank you again. So I'm sorry I was late, so just
It's
a
okay.
question. Your study was basically looking at, as I understand it, the role of administrator-teacher relationship and their satisfaction in the work that they do. Is that correct?
So teacher perceived administrator leadership style and how that's related to teacher morale.
And so you did not get into any of the other cultural issues that, I mean, the last session we had as the committee met had a lot of teacher input around their culture, the school, parental support, etc., and how that impacts their perception of their teaching. You were just dealing with leadership functions.
Correct. However, I did again find in the qualitative piece that people took an opportunity to write about factors that contribute to their job satisfaction that are not necessarily under the control of the school principal.
What did you find in that?
So
What
let
did
me
you
turn to my notes here. Oh, this is sort of an interesting one actually. There was mention of the teacher shortage. There was mention of a toxic work environment, which can be influenced by the principal, but that can also be influenced by community members, any other sort of mandates that teachers have to follow, and those kinds of pieces. New initiatives and goals, that's not always the school administrator who puts those out there. So those were some of the pieces that people felt like detracted from their job satisfaction. And then also on the teacher satisfaction scale, there was one question that asked about working conditions, whether or not people agreed their working conditions were excellent. And that was the one that had the lowest percentage. I think it was around 60% of people agreed. So working conditions can include so much, not necessarily just the principal leadership style, but any of those cultural pieces that were probably talked about at the last meeting would definitely factor into that question or the way in which teachers answered that question.
Go ahead.
Follow-up question, which you just prompted from your statement just now. How much would you say, or could you say, that any of the dissatisfaction stemmed from things far beyond the principal or the superintendent or anybody else to continue? I'll pick one isolated, a member of the community standing up in a meeting and talking about teachers this or teachers don't do that, general accusations of their perception of failure to perform or having the wrong ideas or whatever, dissatisfaction. How much would that be a contributing factor in this degree of satisfaction with the profession?
I can only assume because they didn't measure that piece. However, the teacher job satisfaction scale that I used, the composite score, the average composite score for participants on that was relatively high. So when I sort of compare the data on the working conditions piece and that percentage of agreement being so low, what I would assume is that there are factors other than school leadership that are negatively impacting working conditions and therefore negatively impacting job satisfaction. So that could be any number of things other than the school principal.
Yeah.
And then the other piece that I think as well, just kind of going back to the professional development piece, oftentimes principals do not have control over the professional development that's provided for their teachers.
Yeah.
It's either an SAU mandate or it's a state mandate, and they feel like they cannot actually tailor the professional development to their teachers and their needs. So even though people are writing about, I need better professional development, and the scores on the empowerment survey show that we really need to enhance that for teachers, there also has to be a level of understanding that in many ways the principal does not control that. So that could be another factor that the principal may not have anything to do with that negatively contributes
Might
to
make them less inclined to be a person.
maybe, yeah.
Mr. Appleby?
Under the working conditions category, would be your opinion that also could include, for example, the condition of the building they work in,
Oh, yes.
the supplies they have to use to teach, as well as community support, parental support. Would you consider
Yes,
those
all
factors?
of that would fall into there. I'm so happy you mentioned that because I'm very privileged to work in a district where we have an abundantly filled supply closet, and I work in a beautiful building that was built 20 years ago. That's not the same for everybody, so sometimes I need a refresher on that perspective. So all of those pieces would factor in. I would throw out salary and teacher contracts, and all of those pieces I think would factor into the working conditions. Can't know for sure because we're not inside the participants' minds, obviously, but those are some implications, I think, for future research or literature reviews or those pieces that would be worth looking into to try to get a better understanding of that working conditions piece.
And I'm just thinking of in terms of recently Manchester is embarking upon potentially quite a building exercise of renovations, expansions in the school, and thinking about the age of some of their schools and statewide age of our facilities. The average, I think, is over 50 years statewide. So I wonder how much that, especially like this September where it's 90 degrees plus all September. If you're
Steve, I'd like to respond to what you're saying there. I was a principal. I started out in Maine and was principal 6 years, 4 years as a teacher prior to that. From there I went to Dillingham, Alaska, which is on Bristol Bay. The only way there is either by plane or by barge. And 4 years there. Came back to Gardner, Maine, where I was principal 1 year, and said, nah, I'm going back to Alaska. And so a principal in Alaska for 16 years in the same system, but not the same building, but the same, we closed one down and went to a new building. As a principal in Alaska, I became a distinguished national principal. So the principal of the year from the state of Alaska. I found that there are a number of things which we've discussed here today that impact the well-being, the welfare of that school, community involvement, community respect, working with the community. The school board is tremendous impact on the performance of everybody within that district. And the school board, you have to have as a principal, even though there's a superintendent, or in our case, because we were in a large district the size of West Virginia, and we had to get to know the school boards. As a principal, you had to work directly with them, not always through your administrator. The physical building, the condition of the building, it's not always the new building. People are very happy working in some of our older buildings in the state, but it comes down to the cleanliness and the maintenance of that facility and having the parts of the building which are available to the teacher, like a teacher's lounge. Funding is extremely important. You're going to have a lot of rotation in a district where the pay is minimal. One of the reasons why I went to Alaska, I was able to double my salary by moving that one move. I doubled it. And yet I always went for some purpose that was intrinsic to myself, whether I was going to write a textbook series in Maine, which I did for the state there, and Down East bought it out, magazine bought it out, or went out and wrote the Alaska Sea Grant program in Dillingham, Alaska. And family is another issue which comes involved with this. We came back for 1 year. My wife needed to come back and get her master's. So we came back to Farmington, Maine. But found we couldn't survive. The money wasn't there. Trip back to Alaska and went to an old building. And in that old building, we had more camaraderie because we made use of every inch of that building, including the muddy soccer field which we had. This was an intermediate level school. So there are a lot of dynamics that come into play here, and the principal's just gotta be flexible and understand that the teacher has family too, and we all are working together in that way, and recognize that in order to get ownership in that building, the principal has to get into that classroom, open that door up, and get the teacher involved. So the teacher feels that they are part of the decision making. Even though you're leading them on maybe, but there has to be all that. So there's so much to it, but one of the reasons why I moved was geography. And you know, up in Alaska they say if we can keep a teacher 5 years, we're gonna keep them for 20 years. If they're out of here in 5 years, they're back down in the lower 48. So geography is important. I don't know if everybody could live in Colebrook in this state. The isolation away from places like, well, we used to call it Nordstrom's, but there's not a Nordstrom's around here. But so there's a lot of factors come in play, and as you went through this, I just sort of tripped through my life and say, okay, why did I become what I did become and get that honor down in Washington, D.C.? And it was because of the staff in the building, it was because of what we were able to achieve, and because we were visionaries and futurists. Always looking where we're going, not satisfied with where we were, but to try to all do that. So it's leadership. It's something that's hard to express, and some people just love to teach.
Yeah, clearly there are several factors, and the study is just a snapshot, right, of one factor in so many. It is interesting you mentioned the salary piece. Mr. Appleby and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. I was curious to see what the salary would be in the district where I live, thinking how great would it be to contribute to my community, especially where my own kids go to school. So I pulled out their teacher contract online. It's a $20,000 pay cut if I wanted to teach in the district where I live. So that made the decision right there. There was no way my family could swing that kind of pay cut. And thankfully I'm happy where I teach. I love the school and the community in which I teach. But that is a significant factor, especially in the state of New Hampshire. I have several of my own kids' teachers who have left, and I'm legitimately sad about it, even though my own kid will never have them again. But there's a future set of students coming up who that teacher would be wonderful for, and they leave because of the salary. So that is a big factor.
It's huge, it's huge. We had one of the nicest, best art teachers I've ever seen in Haverhill, New Hampshire. That teacher's teaching in Hanover now. And left because of the pay. And that was it. it's sad because our students in Haverhill lost out on a wonderful teacher. And yet she jumped her salary by, like you're talking, $15,000, $16,000 in a given year. Boom, gone.
There's no question of that.
Don't blame her. And I lost people up in Alaska. They would come in with a science degree and they triple their salary by going off and working for BP and Arco, or Mobil, Exxon. So there's a lot to all this.
It's very, very complicated. There is a lot of so many factors, but I believe strongly about the professional learning piece. I believe strongly about the working conditions piece and seeing what's going on there, especially for those who identify as non-white. That seems to be a very critical factor or implication that's come from this study. The reason I learned about this committee in the first place is because I was doing some research on what every state is doing for teacher retention. And I was looking into policy, and I found this magical website that listed every single state and what every single state is doing for teacher retention. And when it came down to it, New Hampshire was the only state that did not have any, as far as I could tell at that point in the spring, did not have any teacher retention policies actually put into place. Some states simply said minimum salary, and they called it good. Some states had mentoring programs, some had tuition reimbursement, some had compensation for those who teach in critical shortage areas. So there was quite an array of what teachers were doing. And then I came across this committee. And I decided to do more research. I thought, well, the states that are seeing teacher retention rates increase, what are they doing? So I looked at those states and noticed every single one of those had a state-mandated teacher mentoring program for newly hired teachers. Some of them were a 2-year program, some of them were a 3-year program. I'm in a district where we have a fantastic mentoring program. I think it's top-notch. We have a really great teacher retention rate in my district. I can't tell you the numbers, but anecdotally I can tell you people stay. And I think salary is part of it. I think school leadership is part of it, and I think the mentoring program is a big piece. So when we're thinking about those who are in the 3 to 5 year experience, 6 to 10 year experience, what happens is you get the teacher mentoring for 1 or 2 years if it exists in your district, right? If it's there. And then the mentoring stops after 2 years. And then all of a sudden you're a 3rd-year teacher and you're unhappy. That to me says that there's something there. And then this is just an idea that dawned on me not too long ago. How great would it be if we took those people who are in the 6 to 10 year bracket and made them mentors and empowered them through that process to hopefully increase their job satisfaction. And of course we would vet the people who are going to be mentors and those kinds of pieces. But I think that's another factor into this puzzle is what are we doing to support the teachers in the first 5 years or so, and how can we get the people who are in the 6 to 10 years to feel more empowered? Maybe there's something to be said about a mentoring program. Sorry, that was a long spiel and I don't even know if it was on topic.
Support.
I'm gonna switch hats on you a minute and go back into a hat I wore a long time ago of the academic vice president of the university. And I was fond of asking graduate students just after they finished their doctorate, and I remember that feeling. You studied all this stuff, you got all this stuff in your head, and obviously you thought deeply about it. And you must have developed some opinions, but I have one further question. If you had to start all over again and do this study again, what would you add to it?
I think I would add some demographic pieces that I did not ask. I would like to know the age of the participants. I'm not sure if that would have any sort of findings that might be significant. I think I would love an opportunity to do more on the qualitative piece, to follow up and ask further, deeper questions. That's part of the limitation of this type of study, is I cannot go back to the participants and say, what did you mean about this? Can you tell me more? So I value numbers and words, and that's why I decided to do the multiple method study. If my dissertation chair always says, in your next study. So perhaps in the next study, if it's on the same topic, it would be qualitative based, and I could actually interview teachers and get that further understanding.
Follow?
Follow up.
So if there were funding for such a study, I say this in the presence of people who might possibly supply such funding, would you be interested in taking those questions and perhaps expanding on them in the context of New Hampshire or whatever? Would that interest you?
I most definitely would be interested.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did student behavior and discipline problems ever come up?
It came up in the qualitative. I could find the numbers for you. I was actually just looking. Let me see. Oh, so in the qualitative, I decided to put that under the support theme, thinking that that was the way that a school principal would support teachers is through holding students accountable for behaviors and for their choices. And sorry, I just want to make sure I'm giving you the right numbers. Oh, so 24 participants out of 197 mentioned the word student or students along with the words discipline or behavior when describing their principal as being adversarial. So as being somebody who's not on their side, not holding students accountable, not saying the teacher is, correct in the situation. So it came up in the qualitative piece. It actually came up more often than teacher accountability, which I thought was interesting. I just assumed people would have a lot to say about other teachers and whether or not they're held accountable. And only 2 participants mentioned that as a positive, by the way, which I thought was interesting. But the student behavior piece did come up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In your study, when you looked at teachers or school principals, or even administrators at that, was there any kind of a question on your part regarding, are some of these moves that people doing a very natural thing? In other words, when we were young, my wife and I, we weren't really looking down the road 10, 15 years. We were just looking at surviving, having young children. But when we hit age 40, we're starting to realize, wow, these kids are going to go to college. These kids are going to have that. Where are we going to find the money for that? And so what we see is changing condition amongst those which have families, of course. And you're going to, if you're a single provider for the family, you're going to have to move up the chain. It's just like in the military right now where they're supposedly freezing the officer positions right now. If I were a captain right now, I'd say, well, I'm not going any farther. I'm going to be a captain for life, and that's my salary for life. And yet I need additional pay. So as a teacher, I recognize, and after being a 4th grade teacher for 4 years, it wasn't cutting it. I couldn't survive on $6,000 a year. And my wife was to stay at home because we had 3 little rugrats. And so at that point in time, I had to make a decision, what other jobs am I going to do? So then I started selling suits at Freeze's department store in Bangor, Maine. I was in the National Guard, and I had to decide I'm going to have to get this master's program, as well as teaching 4th grade. And so I made the decision to get the master's, but that meant I was on my way to getting a supervisory type position because I needed that income, and I couldn't see it anywhere in the future as a teacher. But we want to keep these master teachers, and I'd already been recognized as the outstanding geography teacher in the state. So I wanted to teach. I got out of the military because I didn't want to go any higher. I wanted to stay where I was, working with the men and the company level that I was working with. I wanted to be a teacher, but I couldn't afford to stay there. So I guess these family conditions put pressures on you and where you're going later on in life, if you wanna have these expectations for your youngsters, for your family, you're forced to make a move of some kind, whether it's from Haverhill to Hanover or changing your job, what you're doing. Did that occur? Did you see that happening or responses from people in this regard?
I did not see that happening, and I didn't see those types of responses, and I wonder if it's because there's an understanding really that the school principal does not control salary. They don't make those decisions. They might take part in the negotiations process for a teacher contract and salary increases, but that's out of their control really. I did, when I was doing my literature review, came across quite a few pieces of research that regarding teacher retention, why people are leaving, especially post-COVID. And what I actually found was that people get into teaching because they want to teach generally. Salary is not necessarily a factor for people when they want to become teachers. They know the salary is low. They become a teacher for a different reason. However, eventually the realization hits that it might not be a way in which they can sustain a family in those pieces. And just ask my husband, you know, he's telling us, what are you gonna do with this degree? I don't know, I wanna teach kids, you know? And again, if I do want to move up sort of the chain of command in the district, I have to go back to school. I have to pay money to go back to school. And in my district, we have a wonderful tuition reimbursement program. I'm very, very lucky. We have a fantastic teacher contract. Not everybody has that. And so if people do want to further themselves, they have to make an investment, and that can be difficult as well. So just an argument or something to think about for a tuition reimbursement program and those kinds of pieces from the state level. Some districts do have them. I believe not every district has that as part of the contract. I could be wrong about that. But I think that's a factor for people as well if they want to further themselves in their career.
I think that is an issue for a lot of professions,
That's true.
not just teachers, but then a lot of them.
That's correct.
Because I've looked at some of the, you know, you pay over $1,000 to go for a 2-day conference, and that's a chunk of money.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You're correct. It is the same in many fields.
Right, so,
State employment, I can tell you this.
any more questions from the committee members?
Well, I know one of the reasons why I stayed in Maine and was there for at least 10 years, I had to stay there until I got vested. Once I was vested, boom, I was out the door and where the money was. So there's a number of factors which keep people tied. You know, I don't know if to be vested there, you had to have 10 years. I got my 10 years and then I was gone immediately. So there's, in order to be a principal, you also have to be a teacher. In Maine, you have to teach 4 years before you can become a supervising principal. And so there's steps you have to take in this ladder, so people are going to move from jobs if your aspiration is to, you know, be a curriculum director or a principal or work in a central office.
Now, when you were in Alaska as a principal, did you also have to teach at the same time?
I had schools 500, 600 kids, so no, I was full-time supervising principal. Also in charge of athletics for the district, which is the size of West Virginia. My travel budget was $1.5 million for athletics alone.
Wow. That's a lot.
It's, you know, then I was challenged by my wife. She said, Rick, you're not gonna take that job in Barrow. I said, why not? I'm getting paid $70,000 there. They're offering me $120,000 up there. And no, I wanna go where there's green grass. We went back to Gardner, Maine for 1 year and couldn't survive. So it's I could write a book on this stuff, and it's been a wonderful experience, but I think the teaching profession is one profession that I'd do it again. There's so much self-satisfaction, and I love this job we got right here, but we only get paid $100 a year. But I get satisfaction other ways, and I'm fortunate to have the dollars to do this. So So, to be a good teacher, you gotta wanna teach. You gotta wanna teach, you got to enjoy working with children, and you have to be able to share what you have and just not regurgitate stuff, you know, so there's a lot to it, and I don't think we're gonna get and keep some of the teachers we should because we're not paying them what we need to pay them. And this old thing that you're only working 9 months a year, that doesn't cut it with me. You're working all the time, even when you're not in the school, you're planning what you're gonna be doing in the future, you're out researching, you're writing, you're doing instruction development, all that. And figure out what, as a principal, what you're going to do for professional development in your building. And we used to have night classes in which teachers are reading thematic reading, and we did it through UAA, Universal Alaska Anchorage. And we all get together in our houses and share our thoughts and work collaboratively to get that, and it was just a good experience. So you gotta have a love for this, and if you don't have a love for it, you can't remain in it
Certainly
and
do.
be successful.
It's a big reason why I have stayed in it for as long as I have. I grew up in Maine, by the way, and my family lives in Alaska.
Whereabouts?
So I grew up in Fort Kent,
Yeah.
right on the tip
I live in that
top.
county too.
Yep, I went to UMaine Farmington, and now my brother is a dentist in Fairbanks, Alaska, and my mom just moved there to be with them. So we got some Alaskan connections.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Just an add-on to what Rick was saying, when my wife and I first married, I'm sure one of the minor attractions was that if she married me, she got to go to college free because that's one of my goals. So,
My husband says I married a teacher because that means I didn't have to pay for my kids to go to camp in the summer.
hey, there are all kinds of things that sway our decision, for sure.
Correct.
So are there any more questions, comments from the committee members? If not, thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. And you have the copies of the slides. If you have any questions or further things you want to talk about, you can always ask Mr. Appleby to get in touch.
Very good, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
So I guess for us, we can talk about how much we have accomplished up to this point, and where, do we have anything else that we need to do?
Well, I'd like to mention, just if I may, I'm putting an LSR in, and it's dealing with teacher preparation, and we talked somewhat about that here, and you have, Steve, where if you're gonna get into an education program, you have to have criminal background check right out of the gun. By the time you're gonna do your student teaching, you have to get it again because it's only good for 3 years. So I'm putting in legislation to try to get passed so that that first round is good for 4 years. So now you won't have to get the criminal background check. You get it once when you're a freshman deciding you want to get into the profession. Then you will have, hopefully keep yourself pretty clean during the time you're in college. But by your 4th year, when you're going to go do that student teaching, you won't have to go pay that criminal background check again.
And if I could just add to that, Department of Safety is working on legislation that will, and working with the FBI, that will allow dissemination of the record to multiple recipients. So right now, that student teacher in the current scenario gets checked freshman year, 3 years later they get checked again, which your bill speaks to. Then senior year, they come to the department to apply for their initial license, they get checked again, unless it's been within 6 months of their last check. And then they go apply in districts, and they get checked by each district. So what this would allow, what Department of Safety is working on, is that when they apply to the department for the initial license, they can also designate other districts to receive a copy of their record, so they don't have to go check individually each one. And this is similar to a process that exists for bus drivers, what they used to do for bus drivers before the department took over issue clearances.
Do you need legislation for that?
So Department of Safety is working on something.
Let us know, because Mel and I can,
Yeah, because I'm gonna be putting in amendments.
It seems to me they shouldn't be limited to 2 years of mentoring, you should be able to.
experience is, as being a principal, that teachers talk with teachers often. But they may not get mentoring money for that. But I always found teachers very open to going down and talking to you. Maybe Ruth, you're a fifth grade teacher next door to me. How are you handling Johnny? I haven't been able to get to him yet. Or how did you do it? And that's the key to the profession, to have that openness to be able to communicate with each other. And I think that's the way it works. Well,
You had something?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm so sorry I missed our last meeting, because I think it was a pivotal meeting for us to listen to those who are out in the field. And I wanna thank Kevin for his notes for that meeting. I must have read these things 3 different times, because I think they were very rich, and I think it captured a lot of what people who are out in the field dealing with this on a regular basis. So Kevin, thank you very much for the job you did on that. That's a good job, thank you.
Those notes make a huge difference.
Oh, yes.
I was looking at some other minutes today, and, when you look at it, you see some of the points that you have to deal with, and that puts the basis in for the report that you have to write,
Exactly.
so.
I have one more to ask this.
Okay, sure.
Steve, Mr. Appleby, last year at the beginning of the school year, we were told that we were short Paris by about, 800 folks. We had a shortage of science teachers, CTE teachers, mathematics teachers, special ed teachers, is what we were informed. Where are we this year with this?
So, great question. We won't conduct the staffing survey until October, because again, the cycle is they're still staffing up. I mean, the Bureau of Credentialing right now is working overtime to fulfill requests and get folks licensed or emergency authorization or whatever piece of paper they need. So we won't really have a good handle until November when we get the surveys back, look at the data. Remember last year I had to extend that end date 3 times. Chase superintendents, we still, I think it was 57 or 59% response rate.
That's what you said.
Yeah, and which again makes it hard to make the case that there's this tremendous shortage when we can't get responses from the field. So that's number one. So I would hope, unfortunately, it probably won't help us for November 1st. We won't have the data back. I can tell you that renewals this year, we just put out a press release. This is the 3rd highest number of renewals we've had in the last 10 years. Last year, if you remember, was the highest number in 10 years. And if we look at the cohort, the 3-year rolling cohort, because it's a 3-year license cycle, this is the largest cohort we've had in 14 years. So, 50 years. So again, I don't have an explanation for that. I don't know what that means. I don't know if they're all working. But I do know that we currently have more license holders than we've had in our records.
So when you talk about licenses, now, this is not, I'm assuming that this would be, if I wanted to become certified in another topic.
Yeah, it's not that.
It's not.
This is individual humans, not individual endorsements.
Okay,
So
so it's not
you may
endorsements,
hold-
not endorsements.
Right,
That's
so,
my question.
so Principal Rick may hold a principal license, an elementary ed license, and a middle school math license. He's one, because he's one human, right. So this is the number of humans that are renewed, not, and that's a misconception that comes up from time to time. It's not the number. The number of endorsements, quite frankly, would be exponentially higher than the number of, we had, I think we're gonna finish this year, including late renewals by December 31st, we'll probably be around 8,300 renewals, which is 8,300 people.
But you don't, there's no follow-up with, as you just raised the question, that doesn't necessarily mean the teaching.
And we won't know
Or even
that.
living in the state.
Correct. And we won't know, we do look at, we have run the numbers, although not in the last several years, we have run the numbers on, because, not living in the state doesn't necessarily mean they're not teaching here, right, because we have surrounding states. So we did a look a few years ago, we ran some queries on our database and looked at outside of New England, who held an educator license through New Hampshire Department of Ed, but lived outside of the 6 states. Because you could live in Mass and teach in New Hampshire. It's theoretically possible that you could live in Rhode Island and teach in New Hampshire. would recommend it, but, and what we found was, at the time, there were in total, out of about 28,000 license holders, there were maybe 1,800 to 2,000 that didn't live in New England. And again, what that means, we don't know, but we do think the new criminal record check system will cut down on that. Because historically, people would come here, get a license, and then go to another state that had stricter requirements but had better reciprocity. And we think now the fact that you need a criminal record check for your first license will cut down on the out-of-staters.
And what is the reciprocity status within our state as it relates to people coming in?
So there is only one state in the country that has true one-for-one reciprocity. The other 49 states have varying degrees of it, including New Hampshire. And typically it relies around, do we have the same endorsement? We all have elementary education as an endorsement, but some states it's 1 through 5, some it's K through 4. So if you come to New Hampshire and you have a K6 or K8 elementary education endorsement, you check that box. The next question is, what has your testing been like and your degree status? If you come in with an elementary ed license from another state that doesn't require a bachelor's degree to get that license, well, we require a bachelor's degree, so you would have to meet that requirement. If you come in from a state that doesn't require elementary ed praxis testing, well, then you would have to take the testing. We could issue you either an in-process of licensure authorization or several other, an intern authorization, but to get your full license, you have to take the tests. So there is some amount of reciprocity, but again, it depends on what you're coming in with.
Thank you.
And again, that's true of 49 states. There's one that doesn't care.
I mentioned a little while ago, when I was an academic vice president, that was at Lowell State College. And, no, Pittsburgh State College, excuse me. I was also at Lowell. The one salient factor about education that I carried away from that job was the last year I was there, almost all of the class that graduated in education never applied for certification. They all graduated, but they didn't apply for certification. They had already quit. Why did they quit? And I've been exploring this. Well, one was, as Rick knows, you just need any kind of a bachelor's degree to get a commission in the military. Doesn't matter what it's in. Doesn't matter what your certifications are. You're a lieutenant. That beats being a private. Every time. Well, almost every time. There were days as a lieutenant, I wish that were private. But nonetheless, I got to thinking about that more, and I got to thinking of the vice president made one of her statements about root cause. So I picked up her phrase and I said, what is the root cause of something like that? Why would they do it? Why would you go? And then I started looking, well, what can you be? And I found out there are a lot of things you can be with just a college degree in anything. In fact, you need it to sell insurance. You need it sometimes for a real estate license. They don't care what you study. They care that you have a college degree, that you have the general knowledge in college. So we might train them. But why do education? Well, you develop a bunch of soft social service skills that are very marketable in industry, particularly retail. So you can become a salesperson, you can go into marketing with just a course or two to qualify at best, or at worst, I should say. And there are lots of things you can simply side-slip into a very much more profitable career. And now we find, as we looked at it, it's to the point where you can make more at Walmart. You don't need to go to college to work at Walmart, but if you do, it's a benefit, and it pays better. You think, what has our economy shifted to? It just almost doesn't make sense. Until you're a teacher and can't afford to pay the bills, and so you go to work at Walmart. And I remember thinking, what are we spending all this money training people as teachers for when they're not going to be teachers? only gotten worse.
If I can just add to that, I think it's actually shifted, and Representative Lennon might know the answer to this question. What is the #1 degree that UNH Durham confers every year?
The #1 degree?
Yeah, and what subject area, do you know that answer? But it speaks to exactly, it's not education, but it's exactly what, it's psychology.
I was gonna say political science.
But how many psychologists enter the field?
Yeah.
We have a shortage,
Yeah.
but it's because of what you're speaking to. It's no longer education, it's psychology.
That's another field that's very difficult to find a job in.
But why then, you're a microphone. Oh, I thought you wanted to, I didn't want to cut in. Why then do we have the universities pumping out all these kids with these 4-year degrees, and they're walking out in the street and finding that, yeah, it might get me this job, but it's not getting me where the money that I put into this, I'm not gonna be able to pay that off ever. And so, and I think we've asked the question here before, if you're in a liberal arts, is there any effort at UNH to get these folks that are taking that history degree to also at the same time get their teaching ticket along with it, so that they have that as a backup or as an avenue? And I got the sense that, oh, we're working on it, but it's not happening. And it's sad because it looks like our education department is pumping out fewer people than it has in the past.
That's true.
So there's going to be a teacher shortage. There is one, even though we have a demographic student population decrease. We're running towards, the wall, and I think this committee really has a responsibility to look at how are we gonna really impact the need for teachers in our society. And I'm concerned that our state university is not doing what it needs to be doing in the Department of Education. You and I have talked about that, Steve. I know you've employed a fellow over there that came out of Granite State who's excellent.
I think Granite State had a very
Solid preparation program.
Thank you.
We know it is.
I was at a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and introductions were made, and this woman who was part of this stock brokerage firm used to be a special education teacher, and I said, oh. We needed her somewhere else.
Yes, but she's probably making the money in the stock brokerage.
There's a theme that's come up, and I apologize, Brian, but there's a theme that's come up that that I've heard from superintendents and principals and some school board members, whereby in collective bargaining agreements, and we've talked about this with CTE teachers, like computer science and SAIL and those types, where collective bargaining agreements don't allow flexibility to negotiate salaries based on job role. Teacher is a teacher is a teacher very often. Even though the need, we have a surplus of elementary ed teachers and a shortage of special ed teachers. But there's not a lot of mechanism with those agreements. They tend to be very restrictive. And I don't wonder if there isn't more discussions that could happen with the unions to get their idea, not that we're trying to certainly want to encourage the unions, but how do you account for supply and demand in the marketplace, and and provide flexibility.
Well, I can respond to that.
Thank you.
I think the dilemma you get into is who's more important. Is the first grade teacher more important than a science teacher at high school? And you get into a whole value question at that point. Notwithstanding the issue of certain areas are in need, there's no question about that. But you do get into a value question about which is more important. And that's why you have a 4-square foot salary schedule. Now, notwithstanding the issue of the CTE, where I think the union is beginning to look at how do you deal with that kind of a shortage issue, where you've got folks who are coming in from outside the industry into a different industry, and how do you accommodate for that and meet that need? And that can be done through a collective bargaining memorandum agreement, whatever it is. So I think those issues are being dealt with, but when you begin to thinking, well, we need more math teachers, or we need more of this, you really get into a problem then of, because if I was a kindergarten teacher, I said, I ought to be making more money, because that's where it starts right here, or a reading teacher. You really get into a difficult conversation around that, so notwithstanding your concerns, Steve.
That's why I asked.
If I could add to that discussion, one of the things, you get some of the answers in the classroom, and I share entirely that. I remember also in the union, just the fact that if you move this part of the equation, you affect that part of the equation. So some part of the union may benefit, but the other part doesn't, and they're all in the same union. And that creates much tension, as you well know. And you have to juggle all that sort of stuff. But I remember a class very distinctly, teaching in a community college, right here in this state. And the kid was very involved in all the current stuff, getting in computers and artificial intelligence and all that sort of stuff. He was all pumped up about it. And we were talking in the classroom, and he said, what do I need to know about writing essays for? I mean, I'm not gonna write any essays. And so I stopped and said, wait a minute. Say you develop the best gee whiz computer program in the world. You got it, it's sitting right there on your computer. You know it's a great thing, and somebody looks at it and says, yeah, that's a great thing, you ought to sell that. Then the question becomes, how are you gonna sell that? What are you gonna do? He said, well, I'm gonna go on the net and do this. And I said, yeah, that's the technique for how you sell, but how are you going to sell it? How are you going to get someone to buy it? What constitutes selling? Of course, I grew up in the advertising age, so a question fell in my lap. And I said, how are you going to promote this? And said, then answer me the other question. Why do you think we assign persuasive essays in this course? To help you sell your computer program. That's why. And then I remembered, I was working as a framing carpenter one time. We got to the point where you lay down the subfloor under thing, right before you start putting up walls and everything. So the guy in charge says, now I want you to square the frame so we can get going on the floor. Square the box, he said. So take out your measuring tape. I want you to, some little young kid I got on the trainer. But what's that all about? He said, well, you measure corner to corner. You have two right triangles. And then it's square. There was a slight pause. And then this guy, you mean there's a use for that stuff? Yeah, no kidding. There's a use for it. Of course, the guy running the place was an engineer. He knew all those uses. But this young carpenter didn't know it. I remember this. It's like a light bulb was over his head. There's a use. But his math teacher never taught him that. Maybe his math teacher wasn't a carpenter.
If we're gonna have this discussion, but I think that Steve brings up a very valid point, and you do too, Mel. Who's important? All teachers are important, but we have supply and demand issues occurring in this industry of education. And when I hear Chris Dodge come up and say, who's director of CTE program down on the coast, and Eric come up out of Hudson, and others coming down from the Lakes region in the CTE saying, we cannot find these people with this skill. They're not out there. And in order to attain them in this school, and remember that all the kids going to CTEs come out with a skill. They're all coming out with high achievement scores on the statewide achievement. They're all bound for a job. And that pays dividends back to society in so many ways. But in order to teach them what they need, you need somebody that's highly skilled, and that is a rare commodity to find. How do we attract that person other than giving them a salary or some kind of benefit or some kind of merit or some kind of I think that we've got to start looking at that. I'm not necessarily saying that we need it. There's some critical jobs we have to do that up. And I think a person like Chris has to have available where he's tapped out his $76,000. How can I get that extra 15 that's necessary to get this person in to help these kids in the classroom? He ended up not finding it. They ended up having to do it online, and it's nowhere near what those kids deserve in public education.
Well, let's
So-
get that into the report.
So somewhere along the way, Brian, we've got to get that resolved.
Well, I think there are a lot of districts who have looked at that, Concord included. I know that was brought up at a particular shortage committee, and but I think a lot of it goes back to, though, each individual district has its own capacity to fund salaries, and so it's not just that they're also competing against other school districts that can obviously pay a lot more. So I think there's a lot to it. Obviously, people are trying to get the best they can for their respective, memberships and in these positions. But all teachers need to make more money,
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, I don't think there's anybody at the
Yeah.
table disagreeing on that.
Yeah.
It's just that, I see some of these holes in these critical areas. And I had the same thing occurring where I was in Alaska, where we had wonderful pay, but the BP platform was just offshore, and they grabbed my biologist, teaching biology in the classroom. They grabbed some of the science people, and, it was hard to find them. So there's gotta be a better answer to this somewhere, where we can retain these.
I'd like to add one set of comparative numbers that I think may help us in this. I picked this up over the weekend when I was studying. These are facts now. These are what they call root cause kind of facts. The annual living wage for a single person in New Hampshire is $62,935.
No,
That's an annual living wage.
no, I'd like to correct, that's what they need to make minimally in order to be able to pay for all of their housing, their food, etc. Yeah.
Minimum
It's not-
wage,
it's
which
not-
they define as a minimum living wage. All right, compare that with the base teacher salary in New Hampshire for a single unmarried person is $22,186 below the annual living wage.
It's 40,000.
It's 40-some thousand.
45,000, excuse me. Yeah, I misread my notes. In fact, you're $45,000 shy of the living wage if you accept an appointment as a teacher, and the same is true for parents, same
Worse
ratio.
for parents.
All right,
It's worse for parents.
word for that, yeah, but same situation. You accept that. So you're already at a low, and there are circumstances in which people don't get promoted because they can't find someone to fill the job they want to promote them from. And we're short of teachers. And so you say, how do we get out of this conundrum? But it's clear, and it right goes back to your question, or your statement a minute ago, that maybe the local community cannot be the only support for those kinds of programs. I mean, if you look, who else, who's gonna pay? Now, there are other sources for some stages of improvement, and I've observed and been told about more. In fact, Mary can probably tell us more off the top of her head than I can grapple with it, so tell us about some of the support.
No, I would just like to, at one point, be given the opportunity to present to the committee the pre-apprenticeship or the teacher pre-apprenticeship program and the teacher apprenticeship option to create that pipeline that it's not the only solution, but it could help. And I would like to present that information to this committee if they so choose.
Well, we could squeeze it in. We have the report is due on November 1st. And I think we have a tremendous amount of information that we could put in, recommendations that we could put in. draft of a report at that point so we can go over it. Is that something that you would like to do? Okay.
Just to give you one statistic, a year ago, New Hampshire was one of the first 9 states in the union to have a teacher apprenticeship program. Now there are 22, and it's growing. And it's because it's becoming a way to help address and to develop that pipeline. And it also provides opportunities for them to really decide, is this what I want to do? Because it's anywhere from a 2 to a 4-year apprenticeship option. So anyway, I would like, and it's paid.
How about something about 3 weeks?
That'll be fine.
Steve,
Are we also, I think it's a great idea what Mary's just saying, but are we getting too specific in saying in order to teach science, you gotta pass the praxis in science. In order to teach mathematics, you're gonna have to be a math teacher, you're gonna have to pass the praxis. A person with a college degree should have some science, should have some math to teach. So have we sort of made this kind of difficult situation worse by being so narrow in our vision of what it entails to be a science teacher?
So I think you're asking almost 2 different questions there. So I think when it comes to standardized testing, I would argue, and I think the state board would also argue, that we want to be very careful about not eliminating standardized testing because currently many colleges are now test optional potential. So what you can have is a student goes through high school where they don't take the SAT, they're not tested late in their high school career. They enter a college that is test optional, so they don't take a test to get into that college. They go through their college career, maybe they get a 3.9 GPA, they graduate, they get a teacher license, they haven't taken a test of any kind, and then they send a writing sample, about their license. They send us a note about getting their license, and they can't write a coherent paragraph. I can produce examples of this, coupled with, redacted transcripts that will show you that they had a 4.0 in their English classes.
Why do they have a 3 point whatever?
Because of grade inflation. It exists at the high school level and it exists at the college level, and it is rampant, especially at the college level. Oliver knows this, we've talked about this. It is rampant in our society, and standardized testing, although not perfect, is the most objective measurement we have to measure knowledge across a large population. And a lot of our surrounding states are dropping testing or have dropped testing, and they're starting to see the results of this, that they're getting educators now into the profession who don't know math, basic English. And so the testing piece, I would argue, leave that alone. That's not, if you don't know 8th grade math in the praxis core, which is the base for all teacher licenses, is 8th grade level math, English, and reading and writing. If you don't know that, do we really want you in a classroom teaching? If you don't know, and you're not proficient at the 8th grade level, that's a concern. So, testing. But your comment about getting too specific, I've been working with the state board and a group of superintendents to repeal some of our license endorsements. For example, we had on the books a comprehensive agriculture educator license type. And this was non-CTE, so this is a non-CTE high school position. It required a bachelor's degree in agriculture to gain this endorsement. The net result was we had 8 statewide, 8. And we only had 1 practicing under that endorsement. They were all teaching other things, the other 7, because they had other endorsements. And in talking to superintendents, they weren't offering agriculture classes as electives because they knew they couldn't get a licensed educator for them. So that licensure requirement was actually impeding the creativity of local superintendents and principals to offer certain programs. So I've been working with the state board and the Superintendents Association and to look at some of these not central to what, not the core classes. The core classes, the foreign language classes, of course those should have a license. But some of these, ancillary, should we really license a 3rd grade art teacher who teaches in the North Country? I just talked to Kate up in, what's the SAU? Lisbon and up in that area. Kate Siegel yesterday. And she can't get art teachers. She doesn't need full-time art teachers. She needs 0.2, 0.4 art teachers. They get a license and she can't get it. So why are we licensing an elementary art teacher who's a 0.2 or 0.4, right?
If they have that other credential, or, you know, the core, taking the core, right? Praxis?
Well, that's part of getting their art.
Yeah, so do you have to take another, something else?
No,
Separate for art?
but the point is, you're gonna get a bachelor's degree,
Yeah.
and, you know, with art training,
Yeah.
plus the praxis score is not an impediment at that point, but you take your test, and then you get a license, and then you get a part-time job in Lisbon teaching art in the 3rd grade. That there's no world in which the math works for that individual. So again, looking at some of the endorsements that we have that restrict the districts and what they can put in the classroom. You know, and being smart about it, working with the superintendents, taking their feedback. And so we've done this now for several endorsements that we've eliminated to, again, that are redundant as well. Sometimes we license and OPLC licenses. School nurse being a prime example of this. What do we know about nursing? We had an incident where Berlin wanted to hire a retired pediatrician to be a school nurse. The way the law is written, they couldn't do it. Which is, you know, we talked about this, you and I and Representative Moe talked about this. So again, why are we worrying about that? Let's focus on chemistry teachers and math teachers and special ed teachers.
Well, you know, we're in an interesting period right now, because a lot of these regulations, et cetera, were created at a point in time where you had a volume of applicants. I mean, one of the things that we discovered in our last meeting that I was absent in is that where you had 60 or 70 applicants, you now have 20 applicants. So I think that the dilemma that we're in is that you have these high standards, which has created a very good education system with those who are teaching. But now we're in a situation where you don't have that plethora of applicants. And how do you deal with the regulations, with the volume that you're dealing with? It's a very interesting dilemma that we're into right now.
Absolutely right.
Is that all in rules or where?
Rules.
Rules.
Those are rules. So
Yeah, we ought to have a recommendation here to look at our rules and try to lighten up a little bit.
I think at this, we have to leave for today, I believe.
Yeah.
I think we have a lot of information, and, how about getting together the first week in October, one of those days? We can send out an email, which day would be best, and be combined with some other committee that we have to come in for.
Yeah, I can try.
So we look at somewhere, yeah,
Thank you, Senator Ward. The first week of October, I'm only available the 2nd, October 2nd,
Second
which is
October,
Monday.
okay.
Yeah, the rest of that week, I've got higher ed commitments.
oh, okay, well, let's take a look at it. And I think that Kevin will help us to put together a report, and I've asked to have it double spaced, and have it sent out to us so that we can take a look at it, and then remember what we have heard, add things that we think are important, and have a nice report done by November 1st. If that's agreeable.
You're gonna make us be nice?
I mean, a
That takes longer.
meaningful report that we can actually do something with. Now, I have read so much stuff, and I said, oh, how can we put it all in?
Yeah.
So,
I'll vote for that.
okay, anything else that we have to talk about today, otherwise I'll.
Well, I think if we can have our next meeting, have Mary do her
Yeah,
presentation.
she's gonna come at our next meeting and present first, and then we'll discuss.
What day were you talking about, John?
October 2nd, Monday.
What kind of days?
On that Monday, I have a CTE council meeting, advisory council. With Jeff
Here, in
in the LOB, where I have it down for 9 o'clock.
You can do October 2nd?
Well, I could come later on,
Yeah, we can take a look and see what's available.
even like 1 o'clock is good for me. But 9
Yes.
o'clock, I do have that advisory
Sure.
council meeting.
You're in Concord. So
I'm down in Concord, so I'm good.
we don't have to come to here.
Well, let's take a look at October 2nd,
Yeah.
and we can send it out, and we'll figure out which one's time and where, so.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Okay, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So
So moved.